Hello everyone, and welcome to lesson 6.4, which is on investigating horizontal and vertical lines. Horizontal and vertical lines are some of the simplest equations that we can write, but are actually the most complicated because as we get to the more common ways to write lines or the common ways to express slope, they look so different, our brains kind of freak out and make more of the problems than what we have to. So we're going to take a little second here and we are going to talk about how to deal with horizontal and vertical lines. So the first type of line we're going to look at are horizontal lines. Horizontal lines are flat lines that run straight across and they have a slope of 0. Okay, so for example, we have these 2 points, and I'm going to tell you ahead of time that this is going to make a horizontal line. Looking back at what we did in the previous lesson, right, we talked about how slope was y sub 2 over y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. All we have to do is label our points and just run our slope formula through this to show you what we're talking about. Like if you get these 2 points, right, you end up getting 1 minus 1 over 3 minus negative 2, which ends up being 1 minus 1 over 3 plus 2, which ends up being 0 over 5, which becomes 0. Okay, so our slope for this line is 0. To show this line, to graph this line, all we have to do is take a look at the 2 numbers that match. Those 2 numbers that match are my y values, so all I have to do is go to the y-axis, labeling my points here like we should on all of our graphs. All we have to do is go to 1 on the y-axis, and since the slope is 0, since we know that 0 slope is a horizontal line, all we have to do is come back and draw a horizontal line right through 1. So, whenever we're given 2 points, if we just need to run the slope formula, we can run that formula and we can get 0 as an answer. Sometimes people think that getting 0 as an answer just is not okay, like you've messed something up. Not true. 0 is fine as an answer for slope. Our slope can be 0. To figure out how to graph that line, you look at your 2 points, you look at the number that matches, see if it's on the x or the y axis, in this case it was on the y, and draw a line straight across, crossing that point on the y axis. If you wanted to write an equation for that, sometimes you might be able to write an equation for that or asked to do that. All you have to do is say, cool, the line crosses the y-axis at 1, so y equals 1. And that's it. Because no matter where you go, the y value is 1. It's a constant. It's a flat rate. All right, so there's that. Now we move on to vertical lines. Now vertical lines are the same, just in the different direction. So vertical lines run straight up and down, and they have a slope that's undefined. Now, why would that be the case? Well, let's take a look again using our slope formula, right? Our slope formula, y sub 2 minus y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. Label our points here, x2, y2, and then we substitute. So we end up getting 3 minus negative 2 over 2 minus 2. That ends up being 3 plus 2 over 2 minus 2, which ends up being 5 over 0. Now, this is where things get crazy. 5 over 0. Sometimes people will look at that and be like, well, a zero's involved. It's just a 0. That's not the case. And I'll put this in red, we cannot divide by 0. You cannot do it. It is not allowed. No. Right? That cannot happen. If you ever go to calculate slope and you get a 0 in the denominator, that is what is immediately called undefined. Some places might call that no slope, but for our purposes, we will call that undefined. So, we can't say that there is a slope because the fraction just blows up when you have a 0 on the bottom. There's nothing that can happen there. However, we can actually graph this. So, you might be thinking, like, well, if we can't get a slope, how can we graph something? Well, the thing is we can graph vertical lines, right? We can draw a vertical line on a graph. That's not problematic at all for any of us. So, much like the last problem, if you're given 2 points and you are asked to graph it, find the numbers that match in either your x or your y. So in this case, our x values match. Right? And our x values match at positive 2. Since undefined slopes are vertical lines, they're basically like a wall that we run into, all we have to do here is draw a vertical line straight up and down, crossing through 2 on the x-axis. If I needed to write an equation for that, I just take a look at the line. I say, oh, cool, it crosses 2 on the x-axis, so x is equal to 2. Now, let's kind of go back and forth to show some commonalities and some similarities just between the two. So, in horizontal lines, we had matching numbers on the y-axis at 1. Our equation was y equals 1. Our line crossed horizontally through y equals 1. With our vertical lines, we had matching numbers for our x values at 2. Our line crossed 2 on the x-axis, and the equation was x equals 2. So it's the same thing, but just depending on which direction we go. Vertical lines have an undefined slope. There's no slope because it's running straight up and down. Horizontal lines have a 0 slope because they are running flat and there's no change. Okay, so let's look at a couple example problems using these concepts and we'll go from there. All right, so the first thing it says write an equation for the horizontal line going through the point 5, negative 9. Well, the first thing we have to pay attention to here is that they told us horizontal line. So if I'm writing an equation for a horizontal line, right, I know that horizontal lines, right, the slope is going to be 0. And horizontal lines, since they go flat across, they are going to cross on my y-axis. So, I take my y value, which is negative 9, and all I have to do to write an equation for that is just say y equals negative 9. It's that straightforward. It doesn't seem like there's much more complication to it, but I promise you, as we get into the more common versions of these problems that aren't 0 or no slope, this stuff kind of will trick us and trip us up a little bit. So, number 2, write the equation for the vertical line going through the point 3, 7. So, again, They tell us exactly what kind of line it is. It's a vertical line, right? Vertical lines are going to cross our x-axis. So our x-axis, we use our x value, and all we have to do is just say that x is equal to 3. And that's it. So vertical lines are x equals, horizontal lines are y equals. And all we have to do is just provide the number of that value of the point that we're given. Okay? Another type of problem that you guys could see here are just given pre-graphed lines, write the equations from them. These are not that bad either. All we have to do is, as we've done before, we're just going to label our axis. We're going to label all of our values here. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, -1, -2, 1, 2, 1, 2, -1, -2. So on 3 and 4, we're just going to go ahead and label everything. We're in good shape. All right, so now whenever we take a look at this, we see that we have a horizontal line. Well, the thing that we have to ask ourselves is, where is that line crossing, right? That line is crossing at 2. It's crossing at 2 on the y-axis. So my equation for this line is just y equals 2. With problem number 4, we actually do the same thing. We find where the graph is crossing. It's crossing at -2. It's crossing at -2 on the x-axis. So our equation is just x equals -2. And we're done. So hopefully this has helped you guys understand the difference between horizontal lines that have no slope and horizontal lines that have 0 slope and vertical lines that have no slope, or what we call undefined. Hopefully you've been able to see how to create equations and draw lines based off the information that's given to you, and you can successfully complete this section. But as always, if you have problems or if you have any questions, please let me know.